Welcome to the Unhinged History Podcast, the podcast where two nut jobs make faces at each other over Zoom while telling each other the history stories you didn't learn in your history books, and we've only recently discovered the details thereof. I'm host number one. I'm Theresa.
I'm host number two. I'm Angie.
Facts.
Ooh, facts. I mean, we could call ourselves whatever we wanted if we're honest.
You know, I call myself a lot of things that my therapist has told me that maybe if I wouldn't allow somebody to talk to a loved one of mine the way I talk to myself, why would I allow myself to say those things?
And you're like, well, because I'm my own worst enemy
Because have
therapist.
you met
Thank
me,
you.
the dumb little, oh, what?
Yep. Yeah. We, these are things. These are things. Who goes first this day?
I,
I mean, technically,
mm.
I did the whole story last day,
So
so.
that means I'm stuck going first. I mean, okay. All right. I'll put my
I
embroidery down and I will give you my face and I will look at my
love that
notes.
face. Dude, wing it. Wing
Okay.
it.
Well, in which case, I hope you're ready for a 30-second dialogue on what I'm going to tell you. I am going to tell you a story from your own backyard.
That's funny because I think my next story is going to be from your own backyard.
Aha. I'm going to tell you about the Indian occupation of Alcatraz.
Okay, hit
Do you
me.
know anything
Let's
about
go.
it?
Not a thing.
What?
That
I I
there
knew
is
about
nothing
this when
coming to
I
my
was a
brain.
Californian. Okay. All right. All
Yeah.
right. So my sources. Surprise, surprise. National Park Service, the
Oh
Alcatraz.
my gosh.
I know. Occupation. National Park Service. We hold the rock, the Alcatraz Indian Occupation by Dr. Troy Johnson, Cal State Long Beach. National Archives, the Sioux Treaty of 1668. Berkeley News, exploring the sound of American Indian occupation of Alcatraz by Anne Bryce. All right.
Did you say the Sioux Treaty?
I did. Good catch. Good catch.
Hmm.
Because I got a little far reaching and I needed to know the actual language.
I love that for us because I'm over here going, I don't feel like Sioux territory is that close to Alcatraz that they would want to have anything to do with it.
I mean,
So I'm
there
excited
might
about where
be
we're going.
a couple of you know, different kinds of biomes in between Sioux and the Bay.
Yeah, I feel like that there is. And so I'm very excited about the journey that you're taking me on.
It's going to be fairly linear. You caught that, and you're assuming I'm going to come at you from left field, make a sharp right, and uppercut you. But I promise you, not the case.
Well, okay, but like to be fair, we've been at this for almost 100 episodes, and how many times have you come from the far left and uppercut me from the right? Like,
Says the woman who told me about grass being used as straws to tell me about the history of bourbon. I will not take your sass, good woman.
I beg your finest pardon, but that was the best lead in to the history of bourbon you've ever heard. So don't even.
I'm not going to fight you.
She's not because she knows I'm right. And here's the thing, if you're curious about the history of bourbon, I'm not sure what episode number it was,
Let me
but
let me
there's a
look it up.
delightful episode.
Let me look it up because now I've got to know. Now, when you say something like that, and I just pulled that off my head like I had the sheet open, I didn't. Let me see.
And that's the one you chose to go with?
Look, okay, thoughts. That was
Honestly.
wow, that was 33.
Wow, we're going back in
That was
time.
September of 2023.
I feel hella old.
I need to put the titles of the episode so I can do more than just say I did Hedy Lamarr that episode. Um, but these are things.
You know what? Every time I look at that, I'm like, this name, this name. Mm-hmm. I know this name. And then like I'll Google like just that, and then the very next sentence I'm like, oh God, the whole story. And it's for both like either party because for whatever reason my brain's like, we've loaded with new information. We can set this
Hmm.
other information in the file box until such time as it is necessary. And I can recall stuff like when somebody says something, like I can recall something amazing. But when I read it, I'm like, right then. I'm not even sure if I knew this name. Like, was this my story? I don't know.
Could be.
Could be. I had to ask Ian the other day if I've ever told him a particular story because I remember telling someone a particular story and I can't remember if it was you or him. And if it wasn't you, then I definitely want to tell it to you, but I
Ah.
don't know how I worded the title in the first place. So here we are.
Well, I mean, you say that, and the number of times that I have told the fam, hey, I'm going to tell Angie this story. They're like, you've already done that one. Like, absolutely
Oh,
not. And it's like,
mm-hmm.
well, I know you've info dumped on me. And if me, then obvious Angie. It's like, you've been getting
Like
my
that
info
would
dumps
make
for
sense.
years.
Yeah, get it together, man.
Angie and I only
Like
do
you
this
don't
once a
know.
week. You get me for 7 days a week.
I'm slightly jealous. I'm just going to be awesome because I am here to support you and lift you up. Carry on.
Okay. So I'm going to bring us back. Come with me.
Okay.
1542.
Wow. We are just taking a tour.
We are. Europeans discovered the Bay Area, even though it's not officially mapped until 1775. Um,
Okay.
Despite us discovering it, apparently indigenous peoples have predated us here 10, 20,000 years.
But we discovered it.
We
Yes,
found
yes.
it. This is us. We found it. Now, prior to
Listen,
coming,
we do one thing well. You
we
know?
bring flags.
Yeah, we do it so good.
Mhm.
Hmm.
Prior to the Spanish and Portuguese explorers coming, over 10,000 indigenous people, later to be called the Olón, which is a Miwok word meaning Western people, lived in the coastal area between Point Sur and San Francisco Bay.
Okay.
And that seems like a really cool number. Like that feels like a much bigger number than I said when we talked about Ishi and the start of the gold rush.
This all feels like a much better situation because we're pre-colonization.
Yeah. Now, when we think of Alcatraz, or when we think of Alcatraz, it's an island in the San Francisco Bay, where we know of it as like the prison, the rock. But early
Welcome to
use,
Rock.
yeah, early use of Alcatraz Island by indigenous people, it's really hard for us to understand what was used, as most of the tribal and village history is an oral history and it's passed down by word of mouth, generation to generation. And a
This makes
large
sense.
portion of our oral history from these people groups is lost because a huge group of native peoples die on European contact and exploration.
Oh,
So they kind of wipe out the
mm,
history.
this checks.
So this makes the understanding Alcatraz's importance to these native peoples pretty hard. Um, we do think that Alcatraz as an island was used as a place of isolation or ostracization for tribal members who maybe violated a tribal law or a taboo. Sometimes it was a camping spot for gathering foods, especially like bird eggs and sea life. But it was also utilized as a hiding place for Indians who were attempting to escape the California mission system.
Okay. I don't know why I would have never thought that. That's so clever, actually, because
Mm-hmm.
like white people are historically not known to go and, well, okay, I was gonna say white people are historically not known to go and do the difficult thing and get to the difficult place, but we all know who our favorite bear boyfriend is right now, so that's not an entirely true statement.
But he doesn't seem to kind of really be keen on colonization. I mean, he was living with the Inuit people and wrote an entire screenplay in Inuit
In Inuit, yeah.
and played the bad
Okay,
guy
so
himself.
most white people, not all white people.
This
That's
is
what we'll go
like
with.
not all men.
Truly. Yeah.
So once Alcatraz Island becomes a prison, we have both military prisoners and civilians who are incarcerated on the island. Because I should mention that a source I did include here, which was an episode of The Dollop. They do a whole episode on Alcatraz. Um, Alcatraz ends up holding a lot of Confederate sympathizers
Okay.
because I didn't see the Confederates entering into Alcatraz, but here we are.
It was on my weird bingo card of all the
Okay.
things.
The largest single group of Indian prisoners sentenced to confinement on Alcatraz occurred in January of 1895 when the U.S. government arrested, tried, and shipped 19 Moqui Hopi to Alcatraz Island. Indian people continued to be confined as prisoners in disciplinary barracks on the island through the remainder of the 1800s and early 1900s. And we all know the big names that went there, right? We had Whitey Bulger, we had Al Capone, we had yada, yada, yada.
Yeah, so most of these are um for lack of a better word, wrongfully convicted, yeah? Like we just rounded everybody up and put
The
them,
Indians, I don't know
yeah.
much about the Hopi who were sent to Alcatraz. So look, I'm going to say that we don't have a history of being right to our indigenous folks. So I'll say that much. But do I know the particular cases? For all I know, they said, I'm going to punch babies for this reason. I don't know.
Okay, I'll take it.
Now, March 21st, 1963, Alcatraz is closed after 29 years of operation, and I could have sworn it was open for much longer than just shy of 3 decades.
Wait, you said, okay, but oh, I'm so confused right now because you
Yeah.
said 29 years, but also we were shipping Confederate soldiers to.
So, but see, when the Confederates were there, we basically just put them in a basement. We didn't build the actual penitentiary.
Okay, so it's not
But,
technically a prison yet.
well, yeah, like, so I
Okay.
think there were, you call out a good thing, and I didn't catch it early on to like dive into the nuance, but I have a feeling there were various iterations of the prison. So when it became a
That makes
USP, a
sense.
United States Penitentiary, that Alcatraz operated for 29 years.
That makes perfect sense.
Okay, good catch. March 9th of 1964, so just a year later, 5 Lakota Indians landed on Alcatraz and declared it as Indian land. And they're going to cite a 1868 Fort Laramie Treaty that described deserted federal land could be returned to the Sioux.
I love this for them.
Yep. Now, the 1964 occupation lasts for 4 hours and was carried by.
Oh.
And the leaders of that one was Belva Cotier and her cousin Richard Mackenzie.
Okay. Go Belva.
And Belva, she has like this great quote. We looked at all the history and found that many of the Indians had been held prisoners here. So, in a way, it was already Indian land. We studied the tides, planned strategy, and looked for someone to take us to the island.
So we spend 30 years trying to get off the island. This is like it's always easier to get into the prison than it is out. This is
Yeah.
the exact scenario where that sentence makes sense.
hmm
Okay.
In subsequent weeks, the U.S. attorney rejected the group's assertion, demeaning it as unfounded. And in July of 1964, the U.S. General Services Administration, or GSA, took over custody of Alcatraz Island.
Mm-mm.
And they're responding to San Francisco's expressed desire to transform the island into a recreational park. The GSA deadline, or the GSA set a deadline of December 1969 for the Department of the Interior to investigate how viable that's going to be.
I'm sorry. I okay, we could have had a pleasure park, but instead we kept it a prison and we pay to tour it and be locked into it ourselves.
But that's for funsies.
Exactly.
Yeah,
I
that's
guess I
that's a
mean it's
park.
still a
That's a
park for
recreation
entertainment
park, right?
purposes, I
Well,
guess.
now
Yeah,
it's a
okay.
national park, but so they're like, what if we, I don't know, just charged people money to go on the ferry, buy a hot dog, and sit on the rocky, uncomfortable coast?
Okay. We're weirdos like that. Let's do it.
We are. And honestly, I think I'd still pay to go.
Oh, I would. Hands
Yeah,
down. I
right?
love the ferry ride.
So November 9th, 1969, a couple years later, Indian people once again came to Alcatraz Island when Richard Oakes, Oxwasani Mohawk. I'm just gonna. I butchered that. I butchered that. I know for sure Mohawk, but as to the specific subgenre, not sure. I think I butchered how that one said. And a group of Indian supporters set out on a chartered boat, the Monte Cristo. And the fact that the name of that boat is what it is, chef's kiss. And
The
apparently,
irony is literal. You're right,
yeah,
chef's kiss.
chef's
Yeah.
kiss. Now, there's many different tribes that are represented in Richard Oakes' crew. And since that's the case, he's Mohawk, which is East Coast. They end up claiming that their group is called the Indian of all or the Indians of all tribes. And that's a great
Okay.
name.
I like this.
They claim the island in the name of Indians of all tribes and left the island to return later that evening.
Okay.
In the meetings that follow the November 9th occupation, Oakes and his fellow American Indian students realized that prolonged occupation is possible. They're here. There's enough of them now. They can do it. And Oakes visited the American Indian Studies Center in UCLA, where he recruited Indian students for what would become the longest prolonged occupation of a federal facility by Indian people to this very day.
Okay.
80 Indian students from UCLA were among the approximately 100 Indian people who occupied Alcatraz Island.
I have this image in my mind that it is 99 Indian students and one white guy who just came out there to fish for the day.
You
And
know,
like,
there's going to be whites that show up.
mm-hmm.
So hold on to that one.
Okay, I'm
But
here
they're
for
not
it.
fishing.
I'm picturing the one guy that came out to fish that had no prior knowledge of this event occurring and is like, well, I guess I'm part of the family now, you know?
I mean, I accidentally came to the cookout. I brought fish.
That's exactly the energy I'm thinking of. Thank you for going there.
Now, other sources cite how, while everything started November 9th, things seemed to coalesce November 20th. And this is as, activists near the blockade that the Coast Guard set up. It's foggy. They kind of just zip on past and get back to the island,
Okay, this
which cracks
checks.
me up. Now, it's important to remember that the occupation force is made up of young urban Indian college students. And the most inspirational person in the group is Richard Oakes. Oakes is described as handsome, charismatic. He's a talented orator. He's a natural leader. He's the most knowledgeable about the landings and is most often sought out and identified as leader, the chief, the mayor of Alcatraz. Now, he is Mohawk, as I said, and he is currently attending San Francisco State University.
Okay.
I mean, not currently, but in 1964.
Right, I knew what you meant.
Another key member is a person named Lenata Warjack,
I love
and
that name.
they are a member of the Shoshone Bannock tribes, and
Okay.
they attend UC Berkeley.
Okay.
This is all happening at this very influential time when Native American livelihoods and cultures are being threatened because the US government has just basically canceled a lot of protections and recognition of Indian lands and tribes. They were calling it termination policies. So they're
Mm-hmm.
withdrawing aid, services, and they're seizing millions of acres of land.
Yeah, and like correct me if I'm wrong, and maybe this is not relevant to the story, but in the midst of this, the land that they're stealing is also land that is 100% used by the tribes, right? Like
Yeah.
they're taking their rivers and their hunting, like they're taking their oh, what's the word I'm looking for? Like their original way of life from them in this seizure of acreage, right?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, we're 100% being jerks.
Yeah, this yeah, okay.
Now, once the occupiers establish themselves on the island, they start organizing themselves incredibly quickly. They elect a council. Everyone on the island has a job. There's security, sanitation, a daycare, school, housing, cooking, laundry, and all decisions are made by unanimous consent.
Okay.
And this works when you have a group of like-minded people all band together and all working for the common good.
I like the daycare.
I mean, honestly, that seems really well thought out. And I kind of wish that we as a society now would put more emphasis and thought into, say, schools,
Early education.
daycares. Mhm.
Yeah, couldn't agree with you more.
Now, they're on the island. They've gotten everything set up. They issue a proclamation to President Richard Nixon and the United Nations and said they would purchase the 16 acres of land for $24 in glass beads and red cloth.
Please tell me because that's what we purchased Manhattan for.
Yes,
Yes. I love that so much.
the
Call me
snark,
Tom Petty. I
the
love it.
snark. And I love that you knew exactly that's what we paid for Manhattan.
You're welcome. I'm a repository of very weird trivia that is one day going to cause me to win Jeopardy.
You actually have to enter to win. You got to submit your name as a contestant.
Leave me to my delusions, please.
That's fair.
Thank you.
Now, there was a podcast from UC Berkeley where Everardo Reyes, a fourth year PhD student in ethnomusicology in Berkeley's Department of Music, said what ends up happening is first they take over, and there's just so much support from people in the Bay Area. They start getting generators, there's food being shipped in, there's powwow drumming.
So that
This,
blockade is not working.
I mean, look, the Coast Guard might need to step up their game because stuff's getting through.
It's like it's reverse Dunkirk.
Yeah.
I love this. Okay.
This is the stuff in my research that I'm trying to uncover now. This is still Reyes's statements. They had
Okay.
meetings and budgets. They had huge plans for the island, and it was really just becoming this amazing cultural center. And I love that, right? I
Yeah,
love
I
that
wish
that
it
was
could
their
have
goals.
stayed
They're
that
like,
way.
we're going to do this really awesome thing. And the federal government is insisting that Indian people leave the island. You know, this, my next line is they place an ineffective blockade around it. We pretty much established that they're just
It's
there for
ineffective,
looks. They're just serving looks.
and they're not doing great at it.
No,
But they did not eat and left no crumbs.
no, that was not them. They were
Yeah,
not
this
eating.
checks.
They were just crumbing the table. I'm
You know,
butchering the slang of the children,
the youths,
the youths. Hey, kids.
if you're not butchering their slang, are you even a parent?
No, you're fair. You're right. I'm living up to my dream, my goals.
Good. Proud of you.
So eventually, the federal government does start agreeing to the demands by the Indian Council, and they're going to like, okay, fine, we'll actually enter into formal negotiations with you.
Oh,
Now,
how
the
nice of
Indians,
them.
the negotiations are fixed. They want a deed to the island. They want to establish an Indian university, a cultural center, and a museum. These all seem like great ideas,
I would have loved that as a student.
right? Just know that existed.
Mm-hmm. Even if it's not something that you could go and tour, like as a student, but to know that people were having a place and an opportunity to share their culture, that's
I
so
mean,
cool. 100% for it.
an Indigenous museum created by Indigenous people, ran by Indigenous people.
Love it. Please and thank you.
Right.
Hmm.
I'm here for it. Okay. So the government negotiators, they insist that the occupiers will have none of these and just says, but you can leave. But you can leave. How about you just
This
leave?
checks.
So that was formal negotiation. So they didn't realize that maybe they could bring both sides to the table, maybe compromise a little bit, maybe everybody get a little tiny piece.
something.
Yeah. By 1970, so things have been going on for a while, the Indian organization began to fall into disarray. The two groups rose in opposition to Richard Oakes as the Indian students began to return to school in January.
Oh, right. Okay, this makes sense.
Yep. And they're being replaced by Indian peoples from the urban areas and from reservations who hadn't been involved in that initial occupation.
Okay. So
So
it's like
many of,
refresh troops, if you will.
yeah, you're bringing in, I was,
Resupply.
there was a different word I was going to go for. But yeah,
I got you.
yeah,
I can't think of the word either.
that's fair. So,
Reinforcements.
yes, that's the word. But the reinforcements, right? Like they don't have the, I go to school in Berkeley, we do things all like this, like so they've got a different mindset. And so
Okay.
that starts to feed into this breakdown of culture.
Okay.
And there's also a lot of non-Indians that begin showing up taking residency. And they're coming from San Francisco, namely the hippie and drug culture.
Hmm. We could have kept them in San Francisco.
We could have. Now, the final blow to the organized leadership occurs January 5th, 1970, when Richard Oakes's 13-year-old stepdaughter fell 3 floors down a stairwell to her death.
Oh my God.
Now,
That's
that's not a good day.
no.
Following Yvonne's death, Oak leaves the island and the two competing groups maneuvered back and forth for leadership.
Okay. I mean,
And
that makes sense.
the federal government is kind of watching all of this, and they've continued to maintain this policy of non-interference, the ineffective blockade that we're just going to watch it all collapse like a flan in the cupboard. The
This
FBI,
feels like quiet ops from the CIA. Like we just came in and knocked some stuff over, and now we're gonna go back to our table and watch.
and we just whispered, "Hey, I think that guy is trying to steal your wife," and walked off.
That's what it feels like.
Yeah, I
I'm
don't,
not saying it was, but that's what it feels like.
I mean, look, am I saying that there wasn't, a whisper campaign going on? Maybe. It doesn't seem too far-fetched,
Mm-mm. No, it doesn't.
especially when the FBI is told to remain clear. Like, don't even step foot on the island.
Oh, yeah, okay. Okay.
Coast Guard, stand down. The GSA, don't remove the Indians from the island. Just let them be. And it does appear that the negotiations are taking place, even though they're largely ineffective, whenever any of the indigenous people ask for something and the government responds with, how about go fuck yourself?
This checks.
So that's negotiations. And at one point, these negotiations are held in secret, and the occupiers are offered a portion of Fort Miley in San Francisco as an alternative site to Alcatraz.
Why not just let them have Alcatraz?
What's so cool about Alcatraz? A, you weren't using it.
Yeah. Like,
These are things. These are things. So mid 1970, however, those on the island had become so entrenched that they've dug their heels in. We want a title. That's all we want. And we want the university and cultural center, nothing less.
good for them.
So the government does what the government does, and they're going to shut off all the electrical, and they remove the water barge, which had been providing fresh water to the occupiers.
Yeah, but they had generators that were brought in, right?
They did,
Okay.
but generators don't make water.
No, I know, but you said electrical, so I was just wondering like how
Yeah,
effective taking the electrical away is if they already have generators.
that's
The
true.
water, yes, that's a bit problematic.
And the water is going to be a little bit of a problem when 3 days later there's a fire that breaks out on the island and several historic buildings are destroyed.
Okay.
The government blames the Indians. The Indians blame the undercover government infiltrators that were trying to turn the non-Indigenous support against them.
I mean, it does look that way. The optics aren't great.
Yep. And we might have had a playbook for this in the past.
I mean,
Now, the new population on the island, they're becoming more and more of a problem. We're getting daily reports from the government caretaker on the island and testimony of remaining original occupiers as they're complaining of open drug use, fighting over authority, and, just generalized disarray.
right, because we also have hippies and druggies
Hmm.
have made their way, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. We've infiltrated.
This is going great.
This is lovely. Now we go into 1971.
Okay.
So
I
this has
kind
been
of
at it
like
for
that
a
it's
hot
been
minute,
at it for a while now.
right?
Like,
We've got new problems happening. In an attempt to raise money to buy food, they allegedly, I have to use the word allegedly, begin stripping copper wire and copper tubing from the buildings and start selling it as scrap metal.
oh, okay.
And three of the occupiers are arrested, tried, and found guilty for selling 600 pounds of copper. So not a small amount.
In 1971.
Yeah.
I can imagine that's a no small amount.
No. No. So early 1971, the press is largely sympathetic to the point where, well, they had been largely sympathetic. And it's around this point that they start publishing stories of the alleged beatings and assault. And in one case of assault, it gets prosecuted. And everybody is starting to, the court of public opinion is changing their minds. They
Okay.
used to be very pro Indians occupying Alcatraz, and now it's like it's getting a bit much. And that's
White
kind of a
people.
bummer because in January of 1971, two oil tankers collide at the entrance to San Francisco Bay. Though it was acknowledged that the lack of the light or the Alcatraz light or foghorn played no part in the collision, it was enough to push the federal government action because they're saying, well, it wasn't because the lighthouse. You turned off all the electricity. Now the lighthouse isn't running. But a formal report says
Oh,
that didn't necessarily play into it. But
how could it
Nixon,
not? If the lighthouse was operational, then the likelihood of accidents like
well,
that happening are low.
if an accident happens in your front yard and the lights in your backyard weren't working,
Yeah,
is the
it's not the
accident
front yard's
because you see
fault.
what I mean? So it
Yeah.
depending on where the light is depends on whether or not this played a factor.
Yeah, okay, I'm gonna have to the defense shuts up.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
President Nixon gives the go ahead to develop a removal plan because he's like, well, I mean, a reason, even if it's a bad one, is good enough. And he says, wait a sec, let's make sure we wait till the smallest number of natives are on the island. And that's when we'll round everybody up and ship them off. Because apparently some of them have been taking day passes and going into the city, going grocery shopping, doing, whatever they
Oh,
need to do and come back.
right, okay.
So that was January. June 10th, 1971, armed federal marshals, FBI agents, special force police swamped and removed 5 women, 4 children, and 6 unarmed natives. The occupation over.
Okay. That seems like a huge force for that amount of people.
I think they
A
were
little
expecting a little
excessive.
more.
Okay. All right.
I
I'll
mean,
give
to
it
be
to them then.
fair, we were slipping in and out without them catching us, so I don't think that they had an accurate head count.
That's true. Okay. I'll allow it.
Thank you.
Thank you, question mark.
Now, it's hard to say whether the occupation of Alcatraz is a success, is it a failure, but I don't think it should be judged by you or I or by any of the metrics we're going to come up with because the underlying goals of the Indians on Alcatraz were to awaken the American public as a whole to the reality of the plight of the first Americans and the need to assert Indian self-determination because they just wanted to control their own things.
I think they have every right to do so.
Yeah. And they've been darn polite about it up until now.
Can't disagree with you.
Now, as a result of the occupation, either directly or indirectly, the official government policy of termination of Indian tribes was ended, and the policy of Indian self-determination became the official US government policy.
Can you say that again? I'm not sure I
Okay,
follow like
so
what that
before
implies,
this,
I guess.
what just started had been the policy of termination, where they were ending the reservations, where they were saying, congratulations, you're full citizens. You don't need our
Right.
support. And now it's like, okay, now we're going to switch. So instead of termination, we're going to have self-determination.
Okay.
Does
Gotcha.
that
I
make
don't know
sense?
how I don't know how I got myself so wrapped around
Dude, every
the
time you
misunderstanding
struggle
there.
with this, I listen to the audio later on and I go, oh, it's because I clearly just said the same thing over and pretended like it was a brand new thing.
No, that made way more sense. For some reason in my brain, I was not thinking of the termination policy. I was confused about the self-determination policy. So just the re-explaining of that made
Yeah.
it make gotcha.
And it might make sense written, but then read out loud, it's like, wait, hold up. What?
Hmm. Okay, yeah, I do that
Yeah.
too. I got you.
But during the period that the occupiers were on Alcatraz Island, President Nixon returned Blue Lake and 48,000 acres to the Taos Indians.
And where are
Occup
they located?
Good question.
I'm so unfamiliar with the area of Blue Lake. We have a Clear Lake in California. I'm going to
So
assume they're not.
they're the Taos Pueblo, and they live in Arizona, New Mexico. So let me look up Blue
Oh,
Lake
okay.
just to make sure I'm on the same one. Blue Lake is sacred to the Pueblo.
That would make sense.
So I am assuming it is near that.
I think that would be an easy assumption to make.
Yeah, it would be really weird for Blue Lake to be in Alaska when the Pueblo are not there.
I would have to agree with you on that,
New
yes.
Mexico. It's in New Mexico.
Okay, that makes sense. I just really love the variety of, I had to ask because the variety of peoples and places that this reached out and that reached it, like,
Yeah,
is really fun.
like when the Mohawk leader was on Alcatraz, but I had mentioned earlier about the Miwok tribes, the Miwok that you and I at least understand. And so it's like, wait, what? So these are all things like, right?
Yeah, it's fun. I'm here for it.
There's occupied lands near Davis, California, that would become home to a Native American university. The occupation of the Bureau of Indian Affairs offices in Washington, D.C. would lead to the hiring of Native Americans to work in the federal agency. And that had a great effect on lives. Surprise, surprise.
Wild. Didn't see that coming.
Now, while Alcatraz as an island was lost, its occupation gave birth to the political movement, which continues today. And one of the great things that I learned when I went to Alcatraz when I was like in middle school and went with my grandparents, and I'd forgotten it and then kind of relearned it in this whole process, because you go through Alcatraz, you've learned about the prison, you kind of see the Indian occupation, but the graffiti done even by the Native Americans who occupied Alcatraz, that wears away over time. So park service employees, I should say, have touched up the graffiti to maintain it.
That is awesome.
And knowing that was just so beautiful.
Yes, I literally just had this exact same conversation with a professor about a statue of Robert E. Lee that is like, 60 feet tall or something. And during the George Floyd era of time, it was spray painted and just covered in all sorts of art. And then there's this discussion, we need to remove this statue. And my thought is absolutely not. Leave it the way it is. That art speaks to everyone.
Yeah.
Like it tells today's story. So while the statue may tell the story of 100 years ago, this is how we feel today. So it's a continuation of it. And 100% agree. Leave the artwork.
Hmm.
Yep, that makes me happy.
But that is the story of the occupation of Alcatraz.
I cannot believe I didn't know that story. Do you know how many times I've been to Alcatraz and I did not know that story?
How did you avoid it? There's like,
The
okay,
thing that I remember most is flicking pennies off the bow of the ferry
okay,
and having the doors locked in the cells while we were in it. That's that's really what I remember. Everything else I remember is from the movie that I've watched 600 times. There's no mention of the
okay.
occupation in The Rock. My source is a Sean Connery film.
You know what? This checks. I'm gonna be honest, and honestly, I'm fine with it.
Thank you.
Hmm. Hmm.
It's a great film, you know, and it was Nick Cage's best.
You know, that's a bar. I'm not gonna say high or low. That's a
It's
bar.
just it's a bar.
It's a
Yeah,
bar.
it's do what you're gonna do with it.
Yeah,
It could be high to some, it could be below ground to others. Like
yeah.
it is what it is.
We have Nick Cage opinions.
We do. We really, really do. You know, he's the best at being the weirdest. So at least he's living his truth, at the very least, you know?
Hmm. Yeah, him and Snoop Dogg.
My guy, the king of the world, Snoop Dogg.
So, what's your story?
I have a little shorty. So I was talking with the husband the other day and I was like, I have brought some pretty sucker punch gut wrenching stories, like out of my scope of stories lately. So I just wanted to find like a moment of my style of unhingedness. And
Is
so
it going to be a
um,
hoax?
and no, there's actually no hoax in this one. I will say though, and it'll make sense here in a few minutes, but there is an element of this story that could be very untrue because this is how their stories are told.
Okay.
I am going to tell you about St. Lawrence. Are you familiar with St. Lawrence?
No.
I am so excited you are not familiar with St. Lawrence. So my sources are the Franciscan media. There is a source out there, and I literally had to use this source because it made me laugh so hard. Popehistory.com. That's a thing.
Okay.
An article from Cambridge on the imperial religious policy and Valerian's persecution of the early church, AD 257 to 260. The eighth persecution under Valerian, this is in part of Fox Book of Martyrs. It's BibleStudyTools.com. The New World Encyclopedia and the Met Museum.org. Have you had a chance? I think I've talked about this source before, but
The
it's a
Met?
phenomenal source.
No, I don't think I've ever played on there.
It's such a cool, like whatever artwork the Met has access to, they post it there and then they give you the background of that art. So you kind of get like the context of like, for example, for St. Lawrence, I had some questions and when I was just kind of beginning like the Google, like what would this have looked like? What would this have meant type thing? Because I'm not Catholic, so I don't fully understand, right?
Hmm.
The Met Museum has one of the works of art that features St. Lawrence, and they give you as like the most in-depth, easily worded backstory. Like you understand who the artist is, you understand why it's this way, you understand who their benefactors are. So it kind of builds the context of the world from when that art was created. So just like I cannot talk about this website enough. It's amazing.
Fair.
So that's where we're at. To get to St. Lawrence, though, I have to enter a couple of other people. Pope Sixtus he is born Oostist, or often called Sextus. He's likely born in Athens, Greece. There's a little bit of debate on his actual birth because there is another gentleman around the same time with the same name who was a student of the Pythagorean school. So it's possible that they are one and the same, but more likely that they are not. So he can be often tied to this other individual, and it's really unclear as to really his early life. But the belief is he is one of the earliest popes to come from Greece. He's born around 215. At the time of his life, Athens is a part of Achaia, which is also part of the Roman Empire. When he becomes the 24th pope, he takes the name Sixtus. He chooses that name because it's
Because
close to the way
fiveth was
his
choose?
yeah, fiveth was choose and was
Fiveth was
previously
choose. Do you
chosen,
hear that as
and
opposed to
yeah,
chosen? Like
it was
I said
choose,
choose, it was
choose.
choose. It was, and
It's
then you were like,
choose.
yeah,
We're
Theresa,
six. I
choose.
choose that one.
You didn't even mock me. You were just like, yep, it was choose.
I'm here for it. I'm here to lift you up, remember? Um, so basically they think he chose Sextus as his name because it's what sounded the most similar to the name he was already called by. Whether that's true or not, that's unclear,
Wait
but
a minute, it
that
was
is
close to
kind
his
of
like you say that and I was like, was it sexist? Was that the word? Like was he was called so often?
Sixtux.
Yeah, yeah, but what was he going by before?
Xustos.
Okay. Okay. I'm now tracking. Sorry, I feel like that took
No,
way
that's
too
okay.
long.
No, it's a little bit confusing because it's three different names. They all sound familiar, and one of them could actually belong to another Greek man from the same time frame that ascribes to a different school of thought. But regardless, he becomes the 24th pope. He takes the name Sixtus, and while he's pope, he mends some fences between the Eastern Church and the African Church, where basic gist is prior to his time, the former pope had sort of created this rift in heretical belief. So if you were formerly a Christian and then you went away from Christianity, like, okay, so first of all, my disclaimer, this is my basic understanding of this.
Okay.
So just if there's someone that knows it better or more in depth, I would love to be taught more because I don't fully understand all of this part. But the basic gist is these two churches believe very differently, and it's caused massive rifts. One side says that if you were formerly a Christian and you walk away from Christianity, but you come back, you cannot be rebaptized. So you're kind of a heretic for life.
That's kind
The
of
other
counter
side,
to legisios saying,
you right, right? And so
repent.
the other side says if they come back, we welcome them. They're Christians. Like that is the shortened, most basic version of this that I could find, and it is the only way I can understand it. There are a lot of big, lofty words and a lot of big, lofty letters written about it, but
Right.
that's the long and short of it. So Pope Sixtus, he kind of mends the fences between these two churches because of his actions. And it's not that he directly says, hey, you can do this or you can do this. He basically just lets it be. And for whatever reason, whether he agrees with side A or side B in his own belief system, his words to both parties just kind of solve the problem.
Okay.
So there's sort of this reunification of all the churches underneath him, which I think is a big deal in his case because we have a lot of stories where there's three popes because we can't agree on things, right? Like,
Right.
so good for him. He is also only the 24th pope, so he's got that going for him too, which is pretty interesting.
Yeah, that feels really young. Well, I mean, I guess they go for life, which could be just a couple of years or decades.
Well, Yeah, and so I was kind of thinking about that. Like the popes that came before him, how many were only pope for 6 months versus how many were popes for 25 years?
I mean, like when I was telling the story of Pius II, and I was like, okay, but then there was another pope. I'm not even gonna say his name because he's only in here for a sentence. And then the next pope, their name
Exactly.
also doesn't matter.
Because they were only pope for like 12 minutes.
Yeah.
Like, so I'm really curious about the timeline of events between 1 and 23, but here we are. Um, so while the story is not directly about him, he is a major player on the board, so he has to be talked about. Um, but here's the thing, he's only the Pope for a little bit because, as we know, human history is full of people with super big feelings, and Emperor Valerian, he's no different. Now, disclaimer here. Emperor Valerian, it's possible that he really didn't have a beef with Christianity as a whole, but perhaps received some bad advice and has a real big love for cash flow and partying. So it's possible that he puts these policies in place because he needs the Christian church's funds to cover his poor decisions. Like, it is what it is. He's
Right.
not the best at his job. I think it's safe to say most emperors probably have a moment like that, if not their entire reign, right? Um, but this was like 1700 years ago, over that actually, and I haven't found any ancient Facebook posts to suggest his true feelings. So just like roll with me
Yeah.
on this.
Fair.
I don't think he particularly hated one side or the other more. I think it is just what it is. But regardless, Emperor Valerian becomes Roman Emperor in AD 2253. And as far as emperors go, he only rules for like 7 years, but he makes some wide sweeping changes in those 7 years. Before him, and for like the first 5 years of his reign, he doesn't really mess with the Christians in his area and Christianity as a whole. But in 257, like right about the time Pope Sixtus has begun his reign, Valerian starts implementing some pretty unreasonable policies and orders to begin persecuting the Christians of the area, and Christians in general. One
But
of the
aren't they his
earliest
side?
orders.
Why are you
Um,
why are you smacking down your side?
so here's the problem. You have we're only 257 years into the early church, right? So there is still a ton of pagan beliefs and rituals and temple events happening. Whether you're Christian or not, you're still seeing all of these things.
Sure.
So it's not so much that they were on his side or that they weren't on his side. It's just that they were people that lived within his kingdom, and his kingdom, for the most part, or his empire, not kingdom, excuse me, let me give him the right word. His empire is still really functioning on this old way of belief.
Okay.
Um,
So I'm lost.
it's okay because I'm going to tell you he ends up sending out some early orders that basically forbid Christians from gathering and gathering in places like cemeteries.
Oh, okay.
Which
Weird
is
hill
a
to die
weird
on,
thing
bro.
to say, but okay, live your life, I guess. He calls for the death of anyone who disobeys his orders.
You like the
So,
cemetery so much, you're gonna join them.
ba yeah, basically, he at this point he bans all meetings, and then he, for whatever reason, kicks the clergy out of Rome, like the Christian clergy. And I think that it has a lot to do with this. There are, I don't know if it's Valerian himself's personal belief or the belief of his advisors, but dis he demands that the clergy, the Christian clergy, offer sacrifice to the pagan gods. Um,
That's what?
right. So whether it's him directly or if it's his advisor, it's his council, whatever the case may be, obviously this is not going to be something the Christians are down for, right?
Like when you're the
Not
head of the
really.
church and you haven't read the book, like this is like,
Well, so this is Emperor Valerian, not the Pope.
oh, Emperor Verli. Okay, sorry. That's why I
Yeah.
was so confused.
Oh, that makes sense. This is Emperor Valerian. He is Roman. He
And
is
it's
not
Pope
the Pope.
Sixtus who,
Yes.
okay, I'm with you now. Sorry, that mental confusion shouldn't have existed, but here we are.
Actually, I could see where it started because I have entered multiple players here, so it makes perfect sense. Um, so as you can imagine, right, the Christians, they're not about this, and they go to ground. Those that stay, those that don't leave the area, those that don't leave Rome, those that don't leave his empire, they go to ground. And New Britannica says that, quote, for protection, Sixtus gathers his congregation for services in the subterranean cemetery of Pre Preetextrius. It's on the Appian Way. On August 6, 258. So Pope Sixtus has been the Pope for less than a year. He has gathered his people in this subterranean cemetery. He has four of his deacons. Okay, so just keep this in mind. They are gathered. They're high-ranking clergy members. We've got the Pope and four deacons. I'm unclear of how many other people were a part of this service, but they are under a cemetery.
Okay, but
They
they're
are
not in it.
literally
They're under it.
right. They are literally breaking like every rule that Valerian has put out at this point. Like they're gathered, they're still in the area, they're having mass, they're doing the thing, right? So with him are four of his deacons I mentioned. We have Januarius, Vincent, Magnus, and Stephen. All of them, including the Pope, are seized and either beheaded immediately or brought to court and returned back to the cemetery for execution.
Oh, I kind of
Because,
thought they'd back down a little bit, recognizing they had top brass of the main religion
well, no,
or
because that's
the upstart religion.
the policy was they want all the top brass. Like you are the problem. For whatever the reason that Valerian thinks this, there they have to go.
Okay, I mean, I just thought this would just be a PR nightmare and that he'd have
You
some
would
lackey
think.
underneath him being like, maybe not, maybe
Maybe like we
not.
don't tweet that, sir. Um,
This is going to end in riots. There will be tears.
you would think, and this does happen, we hear much later and much more often in other popes' histories, but so the Pope and his four deacons, they've all been executed. Pope Sixtus is buried in the nearby cemetery of Calliastus. He would actually later become one of the most revered martyrs from the early church. Now, I do want to say this. Pope Sixtus actually tries to work with the emperor in his, like, okay, you're putting out this policy. I'm going to do what I can to abide by your laws, but at the same time, like, I'm still the Pope. And that works pretty okay for him until the emperor decrees to execute the highest rulers of the church. That doesn't work well for the Pope, because
Yeah,
he's
because
the
that's
Pope.
calling for his head.
Y- Right. So,
Like I was with you until you said die.
yeah. One of the stories that I read from I can't remember the year that the letter was written, but it was not too, I would say within 200 years of his death. They talk about how the likelihood that he was actually murdered right then and there is very high because in the cemetery where he is buried, they still have the seat. And back then, at the time, you could still see the mark of blood from where he was sitting when he was beheaded.
Oof, grisly.
And so that's like behind his entombment. Like you can still see that. Or you could within 200 years. I don't know if you can today, but I
You
thought that
know,
was like
that's a hell of a blood stain. That sounds like somebody else is touching up the
I-
paint.
yeah, I am just thinking, first of all, when I think of the Pope, that's not the visual that I get. And I think I was explaining this to the husband that for me and my modern sensibility, the Pope is like a national treasure, whether you believe in his religion or not. And he's so safeguarded and so It seems so weird to me that a pope would die in any other way but old and happy.
Because we're used to the Pope Mobile.
It, 100%. Yes. And that's what I told him. I said it's because he drives around in this little golf cart called the Pope Mobile. Like, we can't not love the Pope. Like, it just is what it is. But here we are. So he's murdered. Enter stage left. My new favorite saint, Saint Lawrence. Unfortunately, there is little known about his early life, but the end of his life, now that's something. We do know that he was one of the deacons under Pope Saint Sixtus II. He actually does, like I said, he becomes martyred, so he is a saint. Um, as a deacon in Rome, Lawrence is charged with the responsibility of the material goods for the church and the distribution of alms to the poor. So, like, he's their accountant, the manager of their treasury, if you will.
Okay.
So, here's the part of the story that could or could not be 100% accurate, but for all purposes, this is the believed story of St. Lawrence for the last 2,000
Here we
years.
go.
Within a couple of days of the Pope's execution, Lawrence knows he's going to be arrested because he's a deacon and the call is for all high-ranking clergymen, right? Um, and given that we know what his job in the church entails, he decides to completely empty the treasury. He seeks out the poor, he seeks out widows, he seeks out all the orphans of Rome, and he gives them everything. He is said to even have sold the sacred vessels of the altar to increase the dollar amount that he's giving out. So, like,
I love this. Can we do this now? I feel like the church has a lot of wealth.
well, okay, so you and the prefect of Rome are going to have some thoughts together. The prefect of Rome hears about this and he imagines that the Christians have this just considerably huge treasure. And so he sends for Lawrence. Well, more like he arrests him. And he says, quote, "You Christians say we are cruel to you, but that is not what I have in mind. I am told that your priests offer in gold, that the sacred blood is received in silver cups, and that you have golden candlesticks at your evening services. Now, your doctrine says you must render to Caesar what is his. Bring these treasures. The emperor needs them to maintain his forces. God does not cause money to be counted. He brought none of it into the world with him, only words. Give me the money, therefore, and be rich in words." So that's what the prefect of Rome tells Lawrence.
I mean,
He's kind of
look, if the
quoting the
nuns
Bible
take
at him.
a vow of poverty, what you do with golden candlesticks there?
I mean, kind of a valid question, right? Um, but we also, the other side to this is we know the church is also like caring for the sick and the widows and all of the things. So like they kind of also need the treasure. So here we are. But anyway,
But golden
so
candlesticks? That seems a bit egregious.
doesn't it? But it also sounds like the church might have some pretty wealthy benefactors also. So like there's more than one party to go against here. If you're the prefect of Rome, who else is putting into the offering plate on Sunday service? I have questions.
I mean, look, they're putting it in. The church is the funnel, right?
I- right. So Lawrence tells him that the church is in fact rich. In fact, I will show you, quote, a valuable part, but give me time to set everything in inventory or to set everything in order and make an inventory. So, like 3 days goes by. Lawrence gathers together this group of blind, lame, those that are maimed, those that have leprosy, orphans, widows, all sorts of the sick. He lines them up in rows. The prefect arrives. Lawrence opens his arms and says, "These are the treasures of the church." Because if you're going to quote scripture at me, I'm going to quote it right back because I'm not playing your game, prefect of Rome. The prefect is pissed. And
I
he's
mean, look,
so
this isn't
pissed.
what I had in mind. Was a bunch of street urchins.
Pretty much, yeah.
Where's more of the golden candlesticks? I want the china, the
That's what I
crystal,
wanted. Like
the
you
gemstones.
said, where's the hat with the
I
like
want
you
the silk
said.
robes.
That's what I was told. That's what I was told I'd be getting. So as you've pointed out, the prefect, he's pissed and he tells Lawrence that he would indeed have his wish to die, but it would be very, very slowly. In fact, the source that I read for Lawrence, which was the Franciscan media, said he would take it by the inch. Um,
So he played to the pain.
yeah. So the prefect has a great gridiron. So think like those giant barbecues that we see the tri-tips out on
Yeah.
at like the farmer's market. He has that all prepared, lit coals are beneath it, and he has Lawrence's body placed on top. And here's why this man is my favorite now.
You know, but
He's
say
right up
like
there with Olga Kiev.
this is gonna bother me because like I would have a hard time because I'd be like, it smells nice. And then you hear screaming. It's like I can't have tri-tip anymore. Thanks. Thanks.
I am of the belief, based on the writings, there was no screaming on Lawrence's part. Like, no one ever directly says that. But what they do say that happens is after the martyr has suffered a good long while,
Okay, wait.
legends
So he
say,
suffered in silence? Like, how do you suffer for a good long while?
well, if you would be quiet for 2 seconds, I will tell you what he says.
I was listening and I was upset.
Lawrence makes the best remark ever, and he says, it's well done. Turn me over.
So he's got a dry sense of humor.
He's got the best sense of humor possibly imaginable. Um, legends and details of his of Lawrence's death, they travel Damascus, Prudentius, Ambrosia, Augustine, like all these historical writers that are leaving documentations of history, they all have this like huge, lofty story for Lawrence and his very petty flip me over, boys, I'm done on this side comment. Um, the church builds the tomb. They build the church over his tomb, and it becomes one of the seven principal churches in Rome, and a favorite among pilgrimage, those that partake in pilgrimage. And I just love this so much. The Franciscan media has this reflection, and it was simply too delightful not to share. Quote, once again, we have a saint about whom almost nothing is known, yet one who has received extraordinary honor in the church since the 4th century. Almost nothing, yet the greatest fact of his life is certain. He died for Christ. We who are hungry for details about the lives of the saints are again reminded that their holiness was, after all, a total response to Christ, expressed perfectly by a death like this. When I say that my immediate thought after reading this was turn me over, boys, I'm done on this side. That phrase, a total response to Christ expressed perfectly by a death like this. I know that they were talking about his martyrdom in general, but I
And not his
cannot
smart
stop
assery.
laughing. Yes.
Because it's
Just
like,
like
oh, Theresa, you're so Christ-like.
it's beautiful. It makes me laugh so hard, and I know that's wrong. Please forgive me. Um, they said, while little is known about his life, he is one with whom a martyrdom made a strong and very lasting impression. Early celebration of his feast day, which is August 10th, spreads very quickly and is still obviously celebrated today. Do you care to know what St. Lawrence is the patron saint of?
Fried chicken.
Deacons, the poor, and cooks.
You know, this checks.
Doesn't it? Um, in the artwork that you can see on the Met Museum website, with metmuseum.org, I was curious, you know how saints are often depicted holding something or in the matter that they became martyrs for, or like what made them saintly?
Are you going to show me an incredible image?
I mean, I could. I didn't post it. Actually, I do have an incredible image. I can show you both of them. Oh, give me just a second. Here is the first, and I think it just really truly reflects the shade with which this man knows how to throw.
Okay,
Please
so
enjoy.
she is showing me a painting, but it doesn't necessarily seem like a painting because dude is looking over his right shoulder with a meme-worthy face that could only be like,
You have
"Are you
got to be kidding
kidding
me.
me?" Yeah, that's
Yep.
exactly what it is. Like, are you for real? Like, bro, you did not.
It's literally perfect. It makes me so happy. And I didn't put in my, I have to Google this really quick. I didn't put in my notes, but I believe the painter that did this um actually painted um like in the 16th century. So I to me that makes it even funnier. Let me stop sharing my screen for just a moment so I can confirm that for you and then pull up the other image because like I said, it is just gold. Um 17th century, excuse me. So the artist for that particular piece of work was Bernardo Cavallino. He
And
was an
so,
Italian painter.
so many years later, he was like, you know what? Dude needs to have a, are you fucking kidding me?
Yes, I love it so much. I will share my screen again with you and I will show you the artwork that was that's on the Met. Okay, you should be able to see it here at any moment.
Okay, so
Just for you.
I am seeing a it looks like an altar painting. There is some strong gold leaf behind it.
Hmm.
Um, it is a man seated on an altar or a throne-like chair. There is a or there's two attendants on either side of him wearing red and blue, and in
They
front
would
of
be
him,
members of his cult, if you will, like
okay.
the believers that follow him.
Yep. And then underneath are three. Uh,
I'm
I
going
don't.
to assume they're children, but like this
They.
painter has never seen a child before
Yeah. I mean, it's like painting a child, but you're only going to use full adult proportions, and they're
and
going
bad
to.
hair.
Yeah, and they're going to be knee high. So
Oh my God,
none
they're
of.
hobbits. I'm so sorry.
Welcome to Middle Earth.
That is all I can think of now. That is exactly what they look like. When you said knee high, I'm like, yep, they are in fact knee high. Um, what you cannot clearly see in the painting, but is described very well in the description, is that under Saint Lawrence, you see how he's seated above them just ever so
Yeah.
slightly? That's the gridiron he was barbecued on.
Oh, good. I'm so glad that he's like the fact that we
Yeah,
wear crosses. Christ comes back, he's not going to look at his death machine and go, "Oh yes, just what I wanted."
yeah. This particular painting was painted by Fra Filippino Lippi, if I'm saying that right. He is an Italian artist. In this painting, the two other
Filippo.
adult
Filippo
figures,
Lippi.
Filippo, yeah. They
Filippo
are
Lippi.
Filippo Lippi. They are the saints Cosmas and Damien. They are closely associated with the Medici family, and this is why I love this website so much. So that's the story of Saint Lawrence and his snark. Turn me over, boys. I'm done.
I'm here for it. I'm here for it.
You're welcome. I don't think anybody's gonna cry over this, but there are those that may not barbecue for a while.
I
Or if you
mean,
do, offer up a prayer to Saint Lawrence.
yeah. And just remember to flip your meat.
I will never not think of that now. Thanks for
You're
that.
welcome. Yeah. And if you remember to flip your meat and you're thinking, you know, what more appropriate in time episodes can we come up with? It's end of November. What are they going to bring us next week? Obviously, we spent this time talking about barbecue. Rate, review, subscribe. and share us with a recipe to your grandmother's cookout. The
Her
a
favorite
recipe
church group.
to yeah, don't bring us to the church group, please, for the love of God. Could you imagine?
Or do. Live your
Uh,
dream.
you
We're
know
not here to
what?
stop
Don't.
you.
I don't want to deal with the fallout. But on that note, goodbye.
Bye.